You can hardly cross the street in New York City without the smell of marijuana assaulting your nostrils nowadays. The Big Apple is more like the Big Smoke. Recreational use was legalized in September 2021, and it took 15 months until the first legal cannabis dispensary opened in Manhattan. The line was 4 hours long, and in the week since the store opened, queues frequently stretched around the block. The year-long delay allowed drug dealers and gray market bodegas and smoke shops to flourish, while the state took its time to dish out official licenses. But New York is hardly the first state to open its arms to the many tax dollars to be made by legalizing recreational pot. Colorado and Washington state led the charge by legalizing recreational pot use in 2012. There are now just a handful of states where cannabis has not been legalized in one way or another. So when did America's war on drugs change? And how did weed become such a big business? Projections vary, but research firm BDSA projected legal cannabis sales to hit $30 billion. Critics say legalization incorrectly implies there is no risk with marijuana use. Kevin Sabet, a former White House drug advisor, has said potency is a big issue because the average cannabis joint is 4 to 5 times stronger than it was 50 years ago. So that means it's not your grandpa's Woodstock weed. While marijuana possession remains a federal offense, 21 states have legalized recreational marijuana. 38 states permit marijuana for medical use. Some have decriminalized possession, and there are just a handful of states where it's totally illegal.
The biggest con or negative that we're seeing with legalization is that it's in the way that we legalize. The states that have legalized have taken a commercial market approach. And what that means is that they've basically left it to private industry to be the main supplier of cannabis. As the industry grows, more and more money being spent on advertising and on other things to try to incentivize people to use more often. I think it would be best if there wasn't any advertising.
In Vermont, for example, they have a thing called a give and grow model, where you don't have any kind of commercial retailing, but you're allowed to grow your own at home, and you're allowed to share it on a non-profit basis. Total tax revenue from state legalization was somewhere around $10 billion. Purely financial end of things, there is an obvious benefit. Some legitimate concerns around the penetration in the market of big corporate actors. Some of the cannabis companies are now valued in the billions. And once companies get that big, there's a danger that they accrue so much power that they can consolidate the market.
Legalization has meant people with low-level marijuana-related convictions have had their records expunged, and less police time is spent pursuing arrests. Advocates say this is a positive.
Historically, the United States has had a very tough approach towards all drug use. Black populations have been more likely to be targeted for enforcement of marijuana laws.
In Colorado, Washington, Oregon, California, and Nevada, where recreational use of cannabis has been legalized, car crashes have risen by nearly 6% in a decade, according to research that compared traffic data from 2009 to 2019. Doctors, critics, and advocates say there are concerns about long-term and frequent use of cannabis, particularly in high-risk groups, including young people whose brains are still developing, pregnant and breastfeeding women, and people with a family history of mental health issues and psychosis.
You hear about, especially with use of higher potency cannabis, people have had, psychotic episodes or have psychological disturbances.
But because marijuana remains a Schedule I substance at federal level, research into its long-term effects and benefits in areas such as pain management has been limited.
I have the concern that we're in the phase where charlatans advocate cannabis for everything. More and more research is looking into areas such as treatment of chronic pain. There's good evidence that cannabis can help with that.
America's multi-billion-dollar legal marijuana industry is causing an all-time high in teen users. In states where marijuana is legal, parents say their children have fallen into an addiction spiral from the drug. According to a report from Washington State, the potency of marijuana sold on American streets has risen from 4% to more than 15%. Advocates say that a legalized market means safer cannabis purchased from retailers that require ID. Some researchers warn that legalization makes it increasingly easy for youngsters to access the drug.
Before your brain is fully developed, heavy cannabis use can certainly impede cognitive development. And so I've spoken to some people that, really don't recommend that people use cannabis before the age of 25.
Child marijuana use has soared 250% in just 2 decades. According to an analysis of Poison Center data last month, they found cases involving marijuana rose the quickest of any substance, replacing alcohol in 2014 and rising fastest between 2017 and 2020. Edibles that look like candy are particularly concerning.
There has been an issue with children eating cannabis-based edible products. And there has been an increase in A&E visits of people with pediatric poisonings with cannabis products. Generally, I think having cannabis-based edibles that look like children's candies is just a really bad idea. So why not just don't do that?
So why exactly does every corner of the Big Apple smell like weed? Steve Rolls says the problem was caused by cannabis being legalized before the framework was put into place for the state to issue license to retailers. Dr. Katie Harris says population density may be part of the issue. She also says the newness of legalization and the desire of some New Yorkers as well as tourists to take advantage of that are some factors. In New York, retail licenses are slowly being dished out, but an eighth of an ounce of legal weed from a dispensary costs between $40 and $60 before tax, far above street rates of about $35, but about as much as some illicit dispensaries.
As far as states being able to gain that tax revenue, part of that is contingent on people actually using the regulated market.
But more people are using cannabis. Cannabis is cheaper and more available than it's ever been. It's very easy to get for anybody. Dial a delivery and it's at your house quicker than a pizza. The point is ultimately that millions of people choose to use cannabis, whether we approve of it morally or not. And, as responsible policymakers, we have to deal with reality. We may wish for a world in which people didn't smoke cannabis or drink or smoke or do anything risky ever. But the reality is they do.